Hello, I'm Philip Walker from AHDB, and today I'm out looking at the oilseed rape trials which we hosted on behalf of AHDB for fungicide performance. So what I'm going to do is have a look through the crop, looking at some of the key diseases that we see at this time of year, namely Phoma leaf spot. I then go into the importance of why we apply fungicides to control that disease, and the importance of key fungicide timings to give the optimum amount of control of that disease as well. So let's bob down into the crop and have a look. So I'm now down into the leaf canopy looking at some of the main diseases that we see at this time of year on oilseed rape crops. And the major one which we're looking at in this crop and what this trial series is designed to control against is Phoma leaf spot, which leads to stem canker later in the season during the summer sort of pre-harvest stage. So if we come down to the crop canopy, we've got these classic Phoma lesions. So they're normally a sort of white, pale grey lesion, and you get these classic pycnidia, black pycnidia, spore resting structures inside of them. Sometimes they can vary a little bit in colour, as in here we've got a more sort of browner type lesion, but that's also Phoma leaf spot with the characteristic pycnidia inside of it. So how Phoma infections start is you get airborne spores. They fly into the crop, and these come from the stubbles which are left over from the previous crops that was harvested that summer. And after a certain period of rainfall, those stubbles initiate those airborne spores, so those ascospores, and they fly into newly planted neighbouring crops. And those airborne spores, they invade their leaf tissue, mainly through the stomata, but they can also invade through sort of wounds on the leaf as well. And after a period of a couple of weeks of sort of mild air temperatures with some leaf wetness, we start seeing these classic Phoma leaf spot lesions appear. Now what these lesions will do is they will grow and expand on the leaf tissue, and eventually they'll get through onto a leaf vein, and they'll start growing down the leaf petiole, and they'll slowly start to invade that leaf petiole and get down into the stem base. Where they get to the stem base, they'll start forming a stem base lesion, which after a subsequent amount of time, normally quite a long period, about 6 months, you start getting the stem canker. So that is the stem rot. So it's the rotting at the stem base which causes the sort of yield damage that we see from this disease, because that rots through that root structure, that stem base, so that plant can't get any nutrients, it can't get any water, and it isn't able to fulfill its yield potential of what a fully healthy oilseed rape plant can do. So from a small simple Phoma leaf spot lesion like that, during this autumn phase, you can get some quite devastating yield losses and damage to the crop. So to sort of control the Phoma stem canker, we normally try and apply a fungicide on the leaf canopy, because essentially we need to stop the growth of that Phoma leaf spot lesion getting down into those leaf petioles and getting to the stem base to cause the canker. So we apply fungicides now at this time of year to stop that growth from causing that devastating canker to form, because once that Phoma lesion has the chance to get down into the base, the fungicides can't penetrate down there and you'll get no further control. So when we talk about applying a fungicide for Phoma leaf spot control, particularly this time of year in the autumn, we talk about applying them at threshold. Now the threshold for Phoma leaf spot is 10 to 20 plants infected, and we've known from previous trials and studies that applying a fungicide then gives the optimum amount of control. It gives that protective leaf layer which protects the canopy over an optimum amount of period to stop those lesions getting down into the stem base. To judge 10 to 20% plant infected, it's easy to think of it as in 10% as in an instance, so number of plants infected. So it's easy to think of if 1 in 10 plants show a Phoma leaf spot lesion, then I'm at 10% infected. In this crop, we've probably got about 2 in 10 plants here showing Phoma leaf spot, so we're at the 20% mark, so we're at that threshold for applying a fungicide. So it's now at that timing, and it will need a fungicide applied soon in order to provide that optimum protection to control Phoma leaf spot and the subsequent stem cankers that form. So as mentioned, the fungicides are applied sort of around about now when we're seeing that sort of 1 in 10 or sort of 2 in 10 plants infected, so 10 to 20% threshold. And as mentioned, the idea is to get that protected layer of fungicide on the sort of leaf coverage to stop that lesion growing down and getting down to the petioles and causing those stem cankers. Now, most fungicide activity nowadays, particularly for oilseed rape products, is protecting activity, so they provide that protective layer on the leaf. They have limited curative activity in the sense that they don't eradicate the disease once it's applied. It just provides the protection so that lesion can't grow down and get to the stem base and cause the canker. So this is why it's important to try and apply the fungicide when it's at that 10 to 20% threshold, because after that period the Phoma infection generally starts to increase. You start getting above that 20% disease, you start getting into 30%, 40%, 50%, and it starts increasing until these leaf layers start to die off. If you don't get that fungicide on at that key timing and it goes beyond threshold, then effectively you don't have that protective layer on the leaf, and these Phoma lesions have then had time to get down to the stem base to cause the stem cankers. And the longer it's left after threshold, the more likelihood you're going to have of them cankers forming, and you're going to have less activity and less efficacy of that fungicide applied, so you get a reduced level of control. So this is why it's important to be monitoring the crops, looking when it reaches that threshold to get that fungicide applied at that key and optimum timing. In the previous clip, I talked about key fungicide timings for Phoma leaf spot and subsequent stem canker control. In this clip, I'm going to talk about how we evaluate fungicides on this trial for Phoma leaf spot and stem canker as parts of fungicide performance series. So for fungicide performance, we evaluate products, oilseed rape fungicides, which are currently available on the market, and we test them at 4 different rates, so a quarter, half, 3/4 and full, to see what rate of that fungicide gives the optimum amount of control and subsequent yield increase for control of that Phoma leaf spot and stem canker. For fungicide timings, we target 1, as mentioned, at the threshold timing, and in this crop, because it's a susceptible variety that we grow, we also apply fungicides when we get a reinfection period of Phoma leaf spot as well, and they typically occur around 4 to 6 weeks after this initial infection phase, when we get another batch of airborne ascospores get released from previous stubbles and they fly and they cause a reinfection period. So it's quite important on mainly susceptible varieties to check Phoma leaf spot when it comes in at threshold, but also after that to keep checking the crop to see when the subsequent reinfection period is, because there could be a decision to make to apply a second fungicide application.